to talk a little bit amongst ourselves and for an audience to see how how everyone positions themselves towards the crisis, towards your own ideas, what your relation is to your current job, or what your relation is to arts. And it started by seeing that a lot of museums and institutions put a lot of things online for free, and it's really clear that there's a very that there's a quite easy way to put things online and make it accessible. But it also immediately raises the question, like, how do we make it physical again? How do we think a little bit further than only sharing things online? And how do we think about how artists relate to this, how physical artworks relate to this? And yeah, what can be done by us, or how do we think about it? So then we thought maybe we can gather a group of people and talk about crowdsourced questions, because we all have our own interests and we all work from a specific viewpoint, and we're all in a different situation. And go through these questions, maybe several in one go, or maybe it turns out we just need one question per time. It's still very open and also fluid, because also the whole situation changes all the time. And the goal of the conversation is actually to gather ideas that could help us ground ourselves better in the art world, and also maybe to give space for ideas that you cannot share with others, or ideas that are a bit more radical than than you normally would do, because we're in a group. So maybe there's space for that. João is a curator based in Sao Paulo, and I'm a curator based in New Orleans and in the Netherlands. Here in New Orleans, I run a residency for artists, mainly with Dutch support, but we always have international artists, and it's a research-based residency. But it will come back later in the things that we can talk about. So the structure for our conversation is gonna be that we would like to do a very quick round of introductions, that we just say, like, I'm a curator, or I'm a writer, or I'm an editor, or I'm an artist, or a scholar, or whatever you want to call yourself. And that you say where you're based, and that you also say how long you're in quarantine, or how strict the quarantine is. So that we have a kind of a quick overview of where everyone is at. And then your practice can maybe come more to the foreground through the topics we talk about. So we don't need to have long introductions per person, like how you think about things or what the projects you're working on right now in the introduction, but of course this will come through the conversations. Also, what is important is that you can say how long you can stay in this conversation. We don't want to make it longer than 1.5 hours, but we also understand if you only have 30 minutes or an hour or 2 hours, you can, it's very free to also leave when you have to, because we're like super happy that everyone joins in, because Remco is in Auckland in New Zealand, it's 7 a.m. and in Amsterdam it's 8 p.m. So we have to kind of puzzle it together. For the question of today, we thought it's maybe good to go through the questions that João made, and to raise our hands if we want to talk about it, so that we can see like what the most urgent thing is at the moment to talk about. And then João is going to guide the conversation a little bit. And we will, of course, also say our own opinion or why we put this on the list. Hello, Fernanda.
Hello.
Your mic is still off. It's somewhere in the left corner of your Zoom screen. You can unmute it. And hi, Zasha. you are also still muted.
Hi.
Hi. I think, and then maybe what we can do is when someone is talking, the others mute their microphone so that you don't get all the background sounds and that everyone can speak. So maybe, João, you want to go through the questions and we raise our hands.
Should we do a quick round of introductions first? And
let's do that first. Yeah.
Following the mosaic, like from left to right, from right to left. So I'm João, I'm in São Paulo. I'm an art advisor here. I've been in quarantine since the 13th of March. I have a relative that's in Florence. And so I understood very quickly how important that was. And I will pass on to Remco.
João, one thing, can you record the conversation if everyone is fine with that?
Yeah, is it okay? I'm recording this. Are you all happy with that? And after this, I'll give you the link if you want to see it. And
we won't share anything without everyone knowing or saying hello and saying fine. Okay.
Good. So I'm Remco. I'm a curator and director of Art Space Aotearoa in New Zealand, Auckland, New Zealand. I came back from Sydney, Australia, a bit more than 2 weeks ago, and I had to go in self-isolation after that. But in New Zealand, it's pretty strict at the moment. So the whole population, 5 million people, is in isolation. So there's nobody on the streets and only essential services are open, which is going to last for another 3 weeks from now. So that's a whole month isolation just to, I think it's pretty strict. It's as strict, I think, as in Italy and Spain at the moment. So, yeah.
Gabriela? Oh, we cannot hear you.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, somehow this thing doesn't work. Congratulations on first of all, on organizing this chat. So well done. And my name is Gabriela. I'm Spanish, but I live in London, and I am a cultural events producer. And I've been here in lockdown for 20 days or so, you know, like the rest of the world, it seems.
So you don't leave your house and you don't...
In London, in the UK, you can still, you go out for essentials, shopping, that sort of thing, of food. And you can still, you're allowed to go out to exercise, whatever that may be. So, and we've just had farcical situations last weekend because the weather was very good and people just took the parks like there was no tomorrow. But you know, I think that things are now much clearer and people are quite strict. You go out for a run or to walk the dog or for a bit of fresh air and then you come back home. There's nothing else open, and
maybe this is what we forgot with Remco. Remco, how much time do you have to be in the conversation?
Oh yeah, I can be here. I mean, it's in the morning,
great.
So what time is it?
Yeah. And Gabrielle?
I can do an hour if that's okay.
Cool. Yes. Okay, Rachel.
Hi, my name is Rachel and I'm in Mount Street actually. I'm actually British, New Zealand, born, but here in the Netherlands.
Can you raise the volume, Rachel? It's hard for us to hear.
Because I'm sat so far
Yeah.
away.
It's getting better, yeah.
Space. Yeah. Yeah, so I'm in the Netherlands in Maastricht, and I was just trying to work it out when we've been in lockdown, but it was literally, we had the week of the TFAF, and then a couple of dealers had the virus at TFAF, and so in hindsight, it was probably a bit reckless that it carried on. But anyway, at the time, nobody had coronavirus, or at least I don't think anyone was in the Netherlands. And then on the Friday, the 16th, when I just finished my first executive program, and they said that everything's in lockdown as of Monday, online teaching. I work at the university, so we had to move swiftly to put everything online. And so, yeah, I think it's then the same conditions as everywhere else with the shops. Not all shops are closed here. I think we're slightly in between the concept in Sweden, where they have this immunity herding, but it's strict. Yeah, so there's no restaurants open or gym clubs or anything like that, sports clubs. Okay. So interesting to see everybody and hear your stories too, what's happening with the art world. So thanks again, João and Maaike, for organising that. It's nice to meet you as well, Maaike.
Yeah, nice to meet you. I'm back in June, so we can meet in person.
Oh, you think you're back in June?
I'd rather stay in New Orleans. No worries. Tyler.
Hi, everyone. I'm Tyler. I'm an editor, and I'm also an MA student in the Hunter Art History program in New York. This is the beginning of the third week of lockdown here. It started off kind of a recommendation to self-isolate, then an order, and then shuttering all businesses that were non-essential. And now we can still go outside, go to parks, go for a walk, ride a bike. But things have really scaled back. Like the subway is running much less frequently. They've made all the buses free and only do backdoor boarding, which is huge for here, for something to be made free. But there's also kind of scary thing happening that a lot of public space is being requisitioned for field hospitals, because American hospitals are being very overwhelmed, especially in New York. And, we're trickle-in of very bad information. And it seems like the situation, we keep getting news that in 2 weeks, the situation will be reassessed. And it seems like lockdown will at least go until the end of April here.
Yeah, here too. Carolina.
Hi, I'm Caroline. I'm from Brazil. I live in São Paulo, actually. I'm an architect. I've been in quarantine for I think 15 days now. The first 4 or 5 days I was in São Paulo, still working at a distance. But my parents, they have a house at the countryside. So my father gathered the family and said, I think you should come to the countryside so we can be more prepared. And if we have any issues, it's easier than in the big cities. So I've been working from here now for 10 days already. And we have a city nearby, but it's like 20 minutes from where we stay. People are not as, they have not the awareness that we have in São Paulo, for sure, because it's like a smaller city, it's the countryside and everything. So it is different because I saw the atmosphere in São Paulo, and now I'm seeing the atmosphere here. And although it's the same state, it's like totally different approaches. But we see that the people are getting conscious every day because they see that, oh, it could happen to someone in my family. Oh, it's happening to a friend of a friend. And then when you see it coming nearer to your cycle, then the people get more anxious, and it's also started like kind of a form to be more secure and more conscious about what's going on in the rest of the world. I have many friends in Milan, so when everything started in São Paulo, I was already thinking about what was happening in Milan. And I started quarantine right away because I knew that we were going to have to go through this.
Yeah. Philippa.
I'm based in Cape Town, South Africa. I actually flew into the UK and arrived on the 14th of March. I flew out again on the 20th. So. Don't ask, I do those kind of things. You know, and it was a case of I was really only meant to fly out on the 22nd, and I saw the whole, pardon the French, shit show happening, and I thought I better just actually get out to the UK. And just as well, because, I mean, from the South African point, they started effectively, I mean, they've closed the borders. You can't get in or out at the moment. If I had flown back on the 23rd, which is when I was meant to be coming through Dubai, I would probably have been stranded there. So, you know, the fact that I came back 2 days earlier, you know, played in my favor. So I came back and put myself into what they call self-isolation immediately. And that's pretty much where I am. You know, I've got friends and whoever else kind of doing my shopping for me because, you know, other than that, I'm at home. From a South African point of view, we're not allowed to leave our homes unless it's for literally doing essential shopping or going to the chemist or finding medical attention. There's no other reprieve. You can't go outside, you can't take your dogs for a walk, you can't go for a run. So they've really shut it down. But it's also because we unfortunately have such a massive percentage of the population who are literally dirt poor. If this virus takes off in one of the townships or one of the poorer areas, it'll absolutely decimate communities.
Thank you. Zasha?
Hi. I'm Zasha Colah. I'm an independent curator. I founded Clark House in Bombay, where I lived for many years. And for the last 3 years, I live in between Milan and Turin, where I am right now. We've been in lockdown for about 5 weeks now. And it's going to be, they just announced today, it'll be till the end, probably till middle of April at least is what they've announced, but we're expecting till May. I guess today or yesterday night is the first time our 3-year-old daughter started to get, started to lose her kind of happy, chattery self, and started to really miss her school, miss her friends, miss her grandparents. And I'm also somehow in touch with the situation in Bombay, which I thought might be interesting for this group, which is all India in general. That, of course, it's been a really mismanaged, I would say, lockdown, but an important one. And so you have many stranded and hungry people who are trying to get home to villages, but also a lot of protest sites in this time are right now on fire. And one is, is this a lockdown being used in what way, and how is it being manipulated? So that's something I'm also very much while being in Italy.
Thank you. That's an interesting combination, yeah.
Yes.
Hello, Yasmine.
You're in Rio, aren't you, Yasmine?
Sorry?
You're in Rio.
No, I had kind of magically, accidentally come back from Rio the end of February for the open studios at the Jan van Eyck Academy in Maastricht, organized that. So it was quite weird that we still had 3 days with over 2,000 people visiting the academy, and then there was one case of the virus at the TEFAF, the big antique fair, and then it all kind of dominoed from there. And I'm actually calling in from Berlin now, so it's dark. And yeah, I mean, pretty similar, I guess, to most of you guys, working from home, and faced also with a lot of questions, how you deal with this from a perspective of being a residency. You know, there's a lot of artists that cannot go home because their residency was finishing and they're kind of stranded, but also the new people cannot arrive. How do you deal with stipends that are finishing or that are starting while there is no program, etc. So I'm very happy to be part of this conversation. And yeah, of course, there's a lot of kind of more general stories about, hospitals and how complicated this situation is. But I think there is a lot of specificities also for the art sector, particularly in relation to this kind of extreme form of mobility that we all practice.
Yeah. Before you came in the group, I told a little bit about that João and I talked, and that we saw that most things are accessible online, but how to make also the connection again to the physical art world and how you deal with it in your own practice, and that all our practices can also come through in the things that we want to discuss, and that we go deeper into our own backgrounds. So now we keep it like super short, sorry for that, but it's definitely the aim to talk about art in relation to our own lives and our own practice. So also the layer of like what Zasha just told us about her little daughter, or like how maybe you have people that you know that have the virus. It should, yeah, I think there will all be space for that. Let's go to Fernanda. Hello.
Olá, eu sou do Brasil, I'm from Brazil, São Paulo. I'm also an architect, and since 2018, I'm studying art, history of art in FESP.
Caroline, I think you have something in your backyard going on.
Yes, I have. I'm going to turn off the mic.
Yeah.
Well, I'm 15 days at home, and I'm worried about social situation also. But from here, I'm okay. You know, we stay home. We can make a lot of things that were to do, and you know, there's these two sides. I think, and I would like to know the ARCA, and so that's why I'm
here. Yeah, great. And then we have MR. Oh, this is Marwa.
This is Mara. She was secretly waiting for
secret.
Yes. Mara, I think you went there for the beginning. It's like a brief introduction of like who you are, where you are, and what's the situation with coronavirus in your area.
You have to turn on your microphone. It's in the left of you, somewhere you can unmute it.
I did it for you.
Okay, it says mute.
Wow.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, now not.
Now yes.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so I'm from Bahrain. And basically the situation, being an island, we're you know, it's under control. It's a small area. It was easier, I think, but the advantage, honestly, was that the Crown Prince was ahead of the game, and he really was on top of things, way ahead of the other countries, honestly, because it started in China. I can't remember if it was the first case was when, but my husband works for the Formula One, and we were supposed to have the Formula One race last weekend, the 21st and the this weekend. So it was cancelled first in Australia, the weekend of the race, when first one of the team members was found with a case. So the management decided to stop Australia, and then most of the races now have been stopped. But we were ready to welcome the teams. And I think, you know, so far the cases that we have in Bahrain have mostly been from people traveling into Bahrain. My daughter got in from university 2 weeks ago, and she was in quarantine at home, and it ended on Monday. So she's happy that she's done. We're allowed to go out where we don't have curfews, hopefully not yet, but the shops are closed. It closed last Thursday until the 9th, and then we're allowed to open for another 2 weeks before we close again on the 23rd. Banks are open, supermarkets and pharmacies are open. So that's pretty much it.
Okay. As everybody talked, I think, for the introduction round. So we move on to the next part. I think, as Maaike said in I think it was about a week ago, that I was questioning the response we're having from institutions to the corona situation, because mostly what I've been receiving lots of newsletters and emails, and mostly what's been happening is kind of opening the exhibition for virtual exhibitions. And I think this is the first step, but I think there's a lot that needs to change, not just opening the exhibitions. And I've been curious to see whether they will give this next step, because it's not just about virtual access. There's a whole change in perception, there's a whole change in behavior, everything I think is going to change. So we started I put some of my questions to Maaike, and she put some of hers to me, and then we started asking people to raise some questions. And maybe we'll pick one. I'll read the 5 ones we put in the material, but maybe we'll pick one and do a round of discussion today. And so the first question was, how relevant are institutional strategies to reach a homebound audience and support artistic production during and after the epidemic? The second question was, will the epidemic refocus the art market away from the auction and secondary market towards emerging to mid-career? The third question was, what's the role of residencies in times of drastically decreased mobility? The fourth was, are we sacrificing the welfare of art workers in our push to ensure that the public understands the arts as essential during this time? So then I asked to clarify this question, wasn't clear to me. So it seems that the institutions are putting a lot of pressure for the museums to keep doing something, and this is becoming like the workers, the employees are working around the clock, and it's becoming exhausting. So the question is, are we sacrificing the welfare of art workers in our push to ensure that the public understands the arts as essential during this time? The last question is artistic production adapting to a new situation where consumption is made by a network of a home-based audience? So I think I suggest today we focus on the, let's see what you think. Let's vote between two questions. The institutional one, how relevant are institutional strategies to reach a homebound audience and support artistic production during and after the epidemic? And the production one, is artistic production adapting to a new situation where consumption is made by a network of a home-based audience? Who prefers to discuss the first one? Raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, 5. Okay, so that's the, so let's go for the first one. How relevant are institutional strategies to reach a homebound audience and support artist productions during and after the epidemic? So I will choose. Remco, do you want to start? And if you can be aware of the airtime, like if you can keep it to, I don't know, a minute or two, so we do a whole round.
Yeah, I'll keep it very short. I mean, this is an ongoing question already for us in New Zealand anyway. I mean, where many people will think that we're on the edge of the world anyway. So it's kind of difficult already, you know, to always to get people here. So to have international links in terms of research, in terms of art, in terms of getting people here, has always been a kind of a struggle. So there's actually quite a focus on locality here anyway. I think what's going to happen, I just came back from Australia. There was a biennial called the Kneading opening there. They've just closed down and gone online. But I mean, here, the situation in Aotearoa is really, the focus is not only on locality, but specific localities as well. So if we think about kind of indigenous practices, this is very much at the forefront here. So I'm actually, in that sense, like quite excited that I think we're gonna turn to a much more localized sort of, production, audience, and all that kind of stuff. And I think it was something that was already very much in the, an ongoing thing. I think also kind of globally, not only in New Zealand, but and of course this idea of mobility, definitely around the discussions around climate change have been really taking quite a flight the last couple of 2 years, right? Or even a bit more, a bit less. So I mean, I guess we need to see it also in that light, no? So it's not only the COVID situation that brings us back to this kind of idea of locality, but it's been already much ongoing. But for New Zealand specifically, I'm very excited. I think there's an excitement as well in order to raise those local voices. The question is always is going to remain, who are you going to talk to as well? So there will always be a high interest for that local knowledge to flow elsewhere as well. And I think that's a whole different, that's a different question actually.
So so this natural like isolation of New Zealand because of the geographic situation, like give you a hedge in terms of thinking how to interact with the world, and which can be useful in a situation where we are isolated. Then you put, I think it can go two ways. You can turn to local, which is easier because it's what you have around physically, and also it can force you to create new strategies to go global. And so you talked about the first one. In terms of the second one, what have you been trying in terms of institutions of reaching out to going beyond the boundaries to the world? What have you tried any like a strategy in terms of content or in terms of technology? What have you tried to go beyond institutional borders?
Really now, from the COVID situation, you mean, or already?
I think you have a history of isolation because, as you were saying, so perhaps you've developed some sort of strategy.
Yeah, so
and
that's
like London or like Berlin, which already, whatever they do, they're already like so connected. Like I think in New Zealand, you have an experience that can be valuable to us at this point.
I think it's kind of, so I've started to think about it last year around a project that we call The Drift, which basically now has is a curatorial platform that we're setting up. There's no curatorial training here, for example, and not anywhere in the country. So we're trying to set that up from ArtSpace, which is basically a relatively small arts organization, right? So that's one thing that we're doing, and that's called it's called The Drift, and The Drift looks at this movement of the imagination of isolation, because of course we can think about the reality of connectedness, but in the case of New Zealand, we're trying to think about it in this way of imagining isolation, right? So and I don't know if people remember, but last year we had a very big shooting here at a mosque in which 54 people died. And that was one of the examples where New Zealand felt an interconnectedness with the world, right? Which before was, you know, I'm talking about it pretty kind of general now, but was kind of denied, you know? There was, there's also a kind of production, positive production to keep that idea of isolation perpetuating, no? So that's when New Zealand says, okay, we're not connected to the world, like the bombs of North Korea cannot hit us here because we're on the south. This is why all the tech people come here and delve themselves into these bunkers, right? So in order to protect yourself against the end of the world, right? So that's happening. There's an economy in New Zealand for that, actually. So that's kind of quite interesting. So that shows that there's there's people like Peter Thiel, for example, that delve themselves here in the ground. But another and kind of biosecurity is another big thing that New Zealand is big on. So the imagination of protecting biospecies not coming into the country, right? So there's a kind of an idea that we need to protect bad things coming into the country because they will there are somewhat of a danger to the natural environment here of New Zealand. So that's how we've been thinking about it. But I'm quite interested in sort of through programming and through kind of the perspective of contemporary art to look at this idea of how this imagination of isolation is constructed and sort of how to offer alternatives to it, right? Whether that be, I mean, that can have different perspectives. So that's definitely something that New Zealand specifically has a history too, which I think we could learn from. But it's really to look at its infrastructure, also away from the arts specifically, right? So yeah.
Should we move on? Should we move to Yasmine? That you're in Berlin, aren't you? Like in the heart of Europe, like where it's like the opposite situation, perhaps, of New Zealand, or like where institutions don't really need to make a movement to go beyond its borders because the whole world comes to it. And so I'll repeat the question for you, like how relevant are institutional strategies to reach a homebound audience and support artistic production during and after the epidemic? What have you been seeing? What are your thoughts on this?
Yasmine, you have to unmute yourself first.
Yes, yeah. Great.
Let's try and keep it to, let's say, 3 minutes. I'll put my alarm here.
Sure, you give me a sign when I need to stop.
Okay.
No, I mean, first of all perspective scenarios, because we are in the middle of it. And I think the second thing is when you talk about institutional strategies, it really depends on the profile of the institution. What I can, it's very different for a museum or a residency or a small art space, so there's I think it's more about tailor-made strategies at this point, depending, what is the priority of your institution. What you see is that institutions are trying to move their program online, which I don't think is always the best strategy. What I find interesting and what I hope for is, I would say, a shift from our all-time focus on reaching large audiences, and actually kind of inflated audience numbers in all of our applications, to much more also micro events that would be, in the form of reading groups, in the form of guided tours, things with maybe a limited amount of visitors physically. But yeah, it's not per se, the quality is not about reaching the masses, though that doesn't mean that we need to forget about diversifying the audiences. But I think for many years there's really been a focus on as people, especially when we write our applications. In terms of
sorry. Can you connect it a little bit more to you, like what you say, like the micro events, or like how do you connect it now in thinking about your own practice? Because you're not working for an institution at the moment, right? So it's hard maybe to imagine. Oh, you work for an institution.
Yes.
Okay.
I work with the Jan van Eyck Academy residency program in Maastricht, and then I work for other institutions.
So how would you imagine those micro events, for instance, with Jan van Eyck, and how would you make that? How would you make it more concrete, as a kind of example, like what Remco has with his with the drift as an example? What do you think about now? What would be a good thing for us to take into account when we think about how we deal with our audiences?
Yes, so like I kind of quickly mentioned, in something that I've been doing for a while is these reading groups. So it's not a lot of people together and people read at home, but you have a focused conversation together. And I can imagine that is something that would be suitable again to pick up when things have calmed down. But I also organize festivals, and that's something that I think will be less relevant in the future, because it will be grouping much more people together. So
Yasmine, you're close there to, as a resident at the Jan van Eyck. How do you see this was another question that's not our main one today, but how do you see residencies adapting to this corona crisis?
But let's stick with our question. I'm sorry, but we don't. Yeah.
It's hard to resist.
Because we have too many interesting opinions.
Okay. Should we move on then and get to let's hear from Mara. Like we heard the New Zealand isolation. Now how is the Bahrain isolation? How are you? How is you need to put the microphone on.
You mean, sorry, for the artists or the institutions or both?
For the institutions, in the position of being this isolated, being an island, and what did you develop? What sort of strategies were developed so far that perhaps could be useful for us to learn from now? Or like Remco mentions, do you think there will be like a movement towards local culture, which is what's available physically?
Well, primarily I had an exhibition, a group exhibition at the Art Society right before, like it was the end of February we had it. And then events started to be canceled after that. The museum is still open, which is great, limited hours. I don't know, I don't think anyone is going, to be honest, but I'm part of a symposium now for our new airport. So each artist is working from his home. We were given all 3 canvas the same size to produce the artwork. And I just had a photographer today come to document our work. So he was going around to each of our studios. He went to 2 artists before me, and he was going to go to 2 artists after me. So I felt it was nice to be involved in something that all of us are doing, and together at the same time. And we don't know when they're going to be hung, or because the opening of the new airport obviously now got delayed. It was going to open for F1, and now with Corona, it's just kind of on hold. So we're happy that our focus is, we're working on something. And most of the artists that are here locally are obviously, doing things, but it's nice that we have something in common. That's the thing. The symposium.
Okay. And Philippa, your thoughts on the institutional reaction to Corona?
I'm seeing sort of, it happening from 2 sides. Artists who I know as colleagues and as friends and as people I work with. For a lot of them, they've had to make very difficult decisions in terms of the fact that their studios aren't at home. So they've either moved into their studios in order to be able to carry on working, or they're having to completely change their practice in terms of how they're working from where they live. From an institutional point of view, there was a complete lockdown as of last week Friday. So I can't even remember what the date was, the 27th or something like that. Most of the museums, etc., had closed even before that. And it's interesting to see from a digital point of view, which of them have active and successful presence versus, very much sort of the governmental or sort of sub-institutional museums where they're completely unsuccessful in what they're trying to do.
And what do you mean with successful and unsuccessful?
Successful in terms of thinking out the box, bringing their collections, which, I mean, one of my bugbears is the fact that no one in South Africa has actually made their collections available online. So, digital access is non-existent. And even if it is there, it's of such a low quality that you really can't get to experience the work. Where sort of, some of these new institutions, and certainly from a South African perspective, we've had 4 major private institutions open up in the past 3 years. So you'd think from that point of view, with that kind of money behind them, they'd have a far better, digital access to their collections, but they haven't. But they've actually gone, they've actually kind of thought out of the box in terms of how to bring their current exhibitions, their current collections to the public via their various digital platforms. I mean, I think Instagram is probably one of the most successful. Some of them have good websites, but again, the content access is fairly limited. And I really find the social media platforms are the most successful at the moment in terms of bringing content to public. But again, from a South African point of view, how much of the public is able to access that? Because we have such a chronic imbalance in terms of financial, financial access to just everyday items, never mind, digital arts platforms.
And what do you have ideas for, like for instance, what Yasmine said about little reading groups, or would it be an idea to send everybody postcards, or like to fly over Cape Town with a plane and drop something, or like?
I mean, I think it's, again, it's because the COVID-19 virus is crowd dependent. So if you have a crowd of people, your spread is going to be massive. That immediately affects how you can get your content out there. And particularly in the future, who's to say that we'll ever have mass gatherings again, or ever be able to have them, on the type of level that we've had to. So I think from a South African and certainly an African perspective, I think, cell phone companies, for example, are going to have to relook at how they structure their data packages. I mean, we have some of the most expensive cell phone companies in the world. I mean, it costs me a small fortune to be able to have a cell phone. So,
but what about what about practices that are maybe more related to storytelling or Chinese whisper or things like that you could maybe make more or popularize more and spread stories in a different way, or share artworks in a different way? Do you think about that for institutions?
Well, I mean, one of the programs that was very successful when it was run was a mobile, were mobile museums. But again, you come up with a potential crowd problem. If you roll into a small town and you have 5,000 people come and sort of, bomb you because it's the first time for them, that's the kind of thing that needs to be thought through.
Yeah.
I mean, I read this wonderful article a little while ago of this museum in China that had been opened where they only allow one person in at a time. Yeah. I mean, it's such a wonderful concept, but it's so impractical to be able to roll out. Yeah. And from an African point of view, you have to be so careful about making things exclusive because it becomes about money and about skin color.
Yeah. I heard yesterday in one thing that I thought was very interesting. Amazon was doing a strike, but they gathered outside. They were doing a protest, and they protested with the 6 feet distance rule. So they created this massive crowd of people, but with the good size in between, distance in between. I thought that was really nice too, as a kind of model to do festivals and stuff.
I mean, that would be a wonderful thing, but it goes completely against kind of the social infrastructure that we, that we have. I mean, crowd gatherings are, part of the, the sort of average African's daily life. You're in a crowd, there are always people around you, it's community. And I think that's where, I mean, certainly in South Africa, there's been such a massive pushback in terms of the, the restrictions that have been put in place. So whatever solutions are found for the future in terms of being able to get news and to get content out, all of that's going to have to be, thought about.
Yeah, I think if we can move to Zasha, you are in India, aren't you?
Not at the moment.
Can you hear me? You in? No, am I? Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Hi.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, you're in India, right?
No, I'm in Turin.
You are in Turin?
Yeah, I live here.
Okay, I think we had somebody from India but didn't turn up.
I'm from India.
She's from India.
Oh, you're from India, right?
I'm
okay.
Speaking about India as well, because of course I'm following that.
Yeah, I think like when we are thinking in terms of the institutional strategies and like Phillipppa raised is like they can bring their collections and make it digital is one way, but that is still perhaps like we have specialists saying that this corona situation may last anything between 2 weeks and a year and a half. So supposing like it lasts for a year, are we going to be institutions going to be working in a sort of a nostalgic way, like just giving access to what we once had, or are they going to create different strategies to, like the art will change form and they'll create different strategies to somehow nurture different art forms, different experiences. And I think India and South Africa and perhaps Brazil are an interesting place for us to look at, because we have so much inequality that we have whole communities of people in the outskirts that have artistic productions, and that the institutions are trying to reach them, and they were trying to reach the institutions. The new strategies were like coming up. So we had in the outskirts of São Paulo, they were creating an app. They have a different kind of consciousness. So they were saying they weren't comfortable like using, many of the people in the outskirts are like drivers for Uber. And they say, well, Uber comes here, they extract all our wealth. And then when it's time, when we're in crisis, they don't show up and they don't say anything. And the same for Instagram. So we're going to create our own app, and they create like the Suburbs Geeks, which is an app where each one puts up their profile, telling their stories in a way where you feel like crying. Each profile you go and like it really touches your heart. And so it's a strategy to communicate art differently that institutions didn't appropriate, but perhaps they could. And what are your thoughts in terms of Turin and maybe India, or how institutions are reacting and what they could do to react, perhaps inspired on what the suburbs are doing?
Well, I think in terms of access, you know, it's true also over here. One thing that really touched me was in Italy, I recently got an email from the government, but addressed to schools, and I got it via my daughter's kindergarten, which said, for those of you who don't have computers or don't have access to internet, we can help provide it in a short amount of time. And if initiatives like this happen also in India, where a lot of the kind of work we did in Clark House was very analog in any case, because a lot of people, electricity is often a difficult thing. And so the idea of connectivity is not something we take for granted. And so if this forces institutions to think infrastructurally about access, that's interesting. Though phones, of course, telephones is something just in sheer numbers, I'm sure, a lot of very interesting things are coming up. One thing that troubles me is I see on some artist groups where some of the artists was passing around messages of apps that imitated South Korea's kind of, they wished that the government would have this kind of system of checking, if there's a crowd or if that people are gathering. And this, of course, led to a huge debate. And what I think I'm most afraid of is what these new normals will be, what kind of use of the mobile phone in terms of tracking us, in terms of the drones, in terms of surveillance in general will be, because, along with the pandemic, we give a whole lot of our freedoms up. And so this is something art institutions especially will have to be very vigilant, I think, in restoring. We understand now, but we have to be the ones perhaps to lead in creating privacy again, creating also, I think a lot will be lost, but I hope, even if it lasts 2 years, I hope, or 1 year, I hope something very interesting was happening in India recently. I don't know how much it was publicized, but there was a huge political awakening among the youth. I don't know if you've been following this. It went through universities and sit-ins and all kinds of community gatherings called Shaheen Bagh. They started being called Shaheen Bagh all across the country. And these were, it began with a kind of sit-in that lasted 101 days. And this would be all day, all night, mostly by women sitting around campfires, but also men, of course, talking about 2 laws that had come into the country that were very anti-Muslim. And people started to to have a different way of communicating that we haven't had actually, that with our kind of globalized system, we haven't had this form of communication and community self-knowledge. And of course, with coronavirus, this was broken up finally. And what I hope is that this sense of real love and intimacy that came from these movements will not be lost. And that again, in the arts, we work very hard to be vigilant and to, you know, at least at least to talk about what is the new normal, or what will become the new normal, and also to find fictionalized ways to discuss you know, the way in which appropriation is happening and is going to happen, especially in countries like India, where they will use the coronavirus for dictatorial, authoritarian reasons, again, anti-Muslim especially right now. And that is something we have to, as arts professionals, we're all going to be working against automatically.
Yeah, Zasha, I want to come back to 2 points that you talked about, but first I want to hear from Tyler, and if you
have to leave in a bit, right?
Because you have to leave, don't you? And
yeah, I do, but I can contribute. Speaking of institutional responses, as a student, where I go to school is a public institution funded by taxes from the city of New York, and there's the graduate division and a very large undergraduate division that services, you know, many students come from disadvantaged backgrounds, are largely first-generation immigrants in New York City, first to go to college in their families. And so when the school transitioned to 100% online learning, they realized that not every student had a computer or a smartphone that they could use to continue their education, and it set up a real discussion of, you know, this digital inequality. And among a graduate division, who of course tend to be older, a little more, you know, slightly more established in their careers and kind of have more resources, it has kind of spurred a more kind of collective research rather than individual research. And also a discussion of if this move to digital learning will not be temporary. So classes have moved from a seminar table where, of course, there's, you know, the frisson of people speaking together, to this in our boxes. And for an institution that has kind of, you know, that operates on very thin margins, they could make this permanent, and, you know, it becomes just a series of Skype sessions, and which isn't quite what the institution promised when we began. So there are, you know, long-standing concerns.
Yes, yeah. And
what about as an editor for often related to the art worlds? Do you see already that institutions change the way they write or how they want to communicate? Or
I think that there was an initial response by a lot of institutions to this kind of like an ethical quandary. A lot of them, institutions, publications, and even galleries, kind of seeking to have an image referent of the crisis and asking people to kind of, you know, share their diaries of what was happening to where they are, you know, share images of empty streets, which, you know, I think is a lot to engage with. But in New York, because it seems likely that a lot of galleries, especially smaller galleries, are going to shutter because the rent is so high and they don't have any, they're not able to put on shows, they're not able to make sales. The art fairs have been canceled, which are a huge source of revenue for them. Larger galleries that are closed temporarily, of course, employ many artists who are now out of work, who may not be able to pay studio rent or pay for materials. So I think that there's a very, long tail to this here from New York.
Taking notes here. Should we hear from Rachel? What are your thoughts, Rachel?
Yeah, I mean, that perhaps fits nicely into what Tyler was saying. I think my interest as a scholar is perhaps twofold. One is from education, but also my immediate concern as from being an art economist is also about the small businesses who are potentially going bankrupt, and the independent workers who really have to try and make the best they can in this situation without sufficient government help. If you're self-employed, or if you don't have, mandatory sick pay and all these things, I think then there's the inequality is just going to become even greater in the art world, because those people who need the help actually are the ones that really aren't getting it. And the larger institutions, so the auction houses, even the art fairs, to be honest, because they've actually managed to, a lot of them haven't properly cancelled, they've postponed. So the art fair themselves, if they've only postponed, then the revenue that comes in, then they'll hope to get at a later date. So I mean, art fairs are a slightly special creature, as it were, because they're also a small number often of people working there. But I think it may mean that there's more. It was a shame Gabriela's left, actually, because she's interested in the art fairs themselves. But it might mean that there are fewer art fairs in future, which is perhaps something which the art world was all considering in any case, that it was perhaps there was too many to start with, or it's become too much in that sense as well. Yeah, the other area I think is really interesting is education. Tyler mentioned obviously about the move to online seminars and so on, and again I think in future it will be up to universities and online and educational institutions to be able to go back and differentiate themselves again, because people want face-to-face education. Some things work well. I mean, it's a nice setting, and doing these Zoom group meetings, and that's basically how we've been doing our education for the last few weeks. But people want to meet face-to-face and see each other. So I think that's the other area is, of course, the homeschooling, which falls under education in that sense. And I think there can be so many creative, new, interesting ideas for how to get kids now engaged with art in a much more engaging, inspiring manner. And I mean, you hear these stories of, the artists having put together kids packs for homeschooling, and I think some really nice things that are coming out of the art world for the kids, but perhaps also for the parents as well, because the parents are struggling. I don't know how many people here have got perhaps small kids, but they're struggling to homeschool plus then manage a family and to work from home, and that whole dynamic is really changed. And people and their relationships are also getting much more insight into each other's working practices at home or the rest of the family. So there's all these new kind of dynamics that are happening, and I think can be leveraged also in a creative way, so that we maintain the good things that happen, the things that work well, the best practices, before reverting immediately back to kind of, normal, life is normal. So I think there's a lot of, hopefully a lot of positivity that comes out of the creativity, even though my initial concerns are, of course, with from an economical perspective, how people are going to manage day to day if they don't have an income and a salary off the back of their creative enterprises.
Thank you. What should we do, Maaike, now? Should we?
Maybe maybe we can see if, because not everyone said something, but maybe that's fine. If you want to maybe also respond to something that the other said, we should also have some time for that, because now it was more like a conversation between João and me, between all of you. But maybe it's nice if you want to comment, or Caroline.
Yes, I would add something. I had a recent experience because I'm affiliated to MASP, which is the Museum of Art in São Paulo. And they had the dynamic was that they, of course, they had to close everything, and they had like a number of expositions prepared for the year, which had been diminished by, I think we had like 8 or 10 expositions, and they become 4, which is like half of it. And the main concern was that they had lots of artworks which are in exchange with other museums, which we didn't have which we couldn't have the exchange anymore because of what happened with the corona and everything. So I think that the big question is, because with internet and with the digital, we can have the part of art, because when you study art and when you see art, you have like a part that can be a knowledge with informations which you can read and that can have been given by internet, but you have the experience. You have to understand everything that you read. It is so important to see the artwork. It's so important to experience the art. So I think what artists will have to do from now on is to create a different experience other than the one we have been so far. Because you cannot have the experience only to contemplate the art. You have to have something that gives you an idea about the art. And I think that as an architect as well, the main goal that made me become an architect was that I could make people experience different feelings and different sensations. And I think that's what the artist wants as well. So how can we transform these experiences to something that maybe the artist can provide for the public, for, like, I don't know, if, at home maybe, I don't know. But I think the experience is so important. And if you don't have this kind of connection, you don't understand the artwork, you know?
Yeah. And I think that's also one of our main concerns, that we want to find out what could work, you know, or it's still a very open question, because it's so hard to come up with. Like here in the residency, we have a big garden, and we thought we're just going to buy this 6-foot table, folding table, and that the residents still can do their meetings with people in the city, just at one side, to have like this distance in between them, and then maybe create, and then we're not even there, like how we then would translate it into an event or something that people can follow online, and how do you make it physical for them. So it's super complex.
Yeah, alternative, when you said like, Caroline.
Sorry, Joe. No, say, I can say it later.
Yeah. I thought when Maaike talked about this storytelling or whispering, or what can maybe immaterial forms of creating art from where you are, and that perhaps will develop, and maybe that's one of the, and if this is happening from all the apps, as Zasha was, it was an app, isn't it, simulating the Korean experience in India. And maybe we'll see a whole new category of art that will develop and become very, very rich and nuanced. And should we? I wanted to keep I don't know, last 15 minutes. Like our idea was to close 4:30 São Paulo time, another like 15 minutes. And maybe I'd like to keep 5 of 10 of this for us to plan whether we want to repeat this and how we revise the structure, but we don't need to do it now. Maybe we have a few more minutes. But perhaps Fernanda, you haven't said much. Do you want to talk for a couple of minutes?
It's okay. We cannot hear you, but I think you said it's okay.
I
am. Yeah, maybe Remco and Yasmine, you spoke more at the beginning, so maybe after hearing all these people, like hearing the whole group, maybe you have more things to add, or?
No, I mean, maybe one thing, I think I totally agree with you, Maaike, on, I think the main question is, we're seeing a lot of online content. I think a lot of kind of a rush to the online and rush to the digital. I think it has, I'm totally agreeing also with Zasha on the more political element of it, especially when you look at more sort of fragile or larger communities, larger groups, kind of the use of the digital, and I'm quite interested in open and free software movement. So there's a huge fear in that community for giving up privacy, for example. So that, I think that's kind of an interesting perspective. So there's a lot of danger to that as well. So giving up that, it's kind of outside of the art question, I would say. But on the flip side of that is sort of how are we going to be able to meet? How are we going to be able to physically meet? You know, that is kind of the need for us to socially meet is one of the main questions that we're going to need to solve. No, I mean, whether that be being able to travel international, which is definitely a part of probably much of our individual realities wherever we come from. That's one that for me is the main question, how to be able to meet. And I know, I mean, this is nice, and I don't know everybody here on the screen, but my next question would be sort of, oh wow, how to meet up in real life. That's for me still is the main question to solve, because that gives the only perspective on things. Otherwise, there's no reason to meet. The digital is definitely not enough. At least it's not for me. So
I agree.
Maybe because I'm thinking like what you're saying, Remco, about what is the way to meet, or how are these new social encounters, how do you make it physical again? I think that's something which should really keep on the agenda to talk about. And I was also thinking, what I'm very interested in is how to still connected to the institutions, like how do you work with the people and what do you change in your way of working? That could also be taken with us once we don't have the crisis anymore. And like, are there things that we do that are already so in, like maybe we take better care of our personnel, maybe we have a different time schedule and it actually works much better, or maybe the fact that not everyone meets constantly in physical space, maybe it's in the long run it's also better for the way that we will work once we open the institutions again. So that would be, for me, would be interesting to, from this dialogue, to talk about next time. I don't know with you, João, and I also think from the whole group it would be good to see how you want to be involved, and if you want to dedicate more time of this, or that you say like, okay, invite me in a month or in 2 months, or what are your most pressured or what is your wish to talk about, that it really becomes kind of a fluid thing that shapes itself.
Yeah, I don't know what your thoughts, and my suggestion was that we repeat in 2 weeks, and maybe as we saw today, maybe it's too ambitious to have several questions because these questions are quite complex and in their own right, and so maybe we choose, like we crowdsource. If you have questions, if you something that's not time consuming and that could be helpful, like if you're going through your day to day and thinking about something that you think is worth sharing, and then send it to us by WhatsApp, and which is how this conversation today started. Like I was every day thinking about something, and then I went and I started to share with Maaike. And so if you have questions that you are asking yourself that you think are relevant and important to the debate, then share it with us, and we'll crowdsource the questions and then pick one or a few that are related and bring it to discussion on a similar format in 2 weeks' time. And perhaps open to more, like today we didn't really put in our Instagrams, or we didn't really promote it in any way. Perhaps we can have a bigger group and assign people who are like panelists who are discussing it, and people who are watching. Could be a way. So I feel like in São Paulo, in Brazil, there's so many people who want to learn about art. They need guidance, they need the north, they're hungry for information. And so doing a discussion like this without giving access makes me feel bad. And like I was talking about this with Maaike in the beginning, like there's so many people who are desperate to have some sort of more, some sort of temperature of what's being discussed, what's relevant, how do I make a difference? And then we have like this global conversation with different points of views and geography affecting strategies and so many interesting things, and then people are not hearing. So so it's not difficult for me, I don't know, to integrate this with YouTube and let some people watch it, and if they're interested, and put on our Instagrams and let's.
Is it an idea that we would indeed crowdsource the questions, and then that as this starting group, that we maybe all prepare a little statement in connection to the question, so that we can have maybe a few more people, but maybe also not too many per time, and that we can just, because if it's a public thing, that people can just hear our little statements, and that we then can have a more discussion about it, so that everyone, that it's maybe a little bit more prepared in that sense and more focused, and we can then also challenge each other's idea a little bit. But maybe it's more interesting for an audience to, if you're like what you're saying, João, I totally agree with, that there's a lot of people who like to hear, like us, like to hear all these different experiences, situations, how different it is to deal in South Africa with crowds than, for instance, in the Netherlands, or here in New Orleans. So that could maybe be an idea.
Yeah, simple things that we're all very busy, like simple things that we can do is like to choose a statement or to share a question. It's something that can be done without really getting out of our flow. And so I don't intend to create a project that's kind of putting stuff in our diaries that's already super busy. But if it's to share a question, it's maybe to think of a statement and then joining in for a call, something that's easy to do. And it's so valuable. Like I started my self-isolation like almost 3 weeks ago because I talked to somebody in Italy. And if I hadn't had that call with Italy, maybe I wouldn't have started that isolation. It was this first-hand experience that was so valuable, because like what we see in the news doesn't really count quite often. What we see in the social media, quite often we disregard because there's so much fake news or some like political interests. And so like to hear somebody speaking from firsthand, it's great. So So I suggest we move this way. If you have questions that come to you, or articles, or like news or something, you share with us. And then we'll suggest a date in same time. Maybe we can rotate the sacrifice. So we can do like a 3 p.m. in Auckland time. So it's not 3 p.m. in São Paulo. It's too comfortable for me. And we rotate the schedule. And then if you want to help, like if you think it's valuable and you want to help sharing, I'll prepare a few flyers or something, and you can share on your media channels, and they can join us on YouTube or something. It's quite easy for me to do this. And then we grow the conversation, because it's nice people from the public. They sometimes can come with some very relevant questions. And anyone wants to comment? And any idea, any suggestion?
You can also email us with, like, if you think in a few days, like, hey, this structure didn't work, please do this or that. Or if you say like, hey, this is something that we spoke about during the conversation, I think it's really something to focus on next time. We are super happy to hear that, because it's not, we just started it because we had the conversation, but we think we're not the ones, the wizards of the current situation, or how to deal with it, or what to talk about. So it's also very much from our own personal interest. And I think we're both very much interested in developing new ways of communicating about this or dealing with it. And it's not maybe we have to lead it a little bit in like, okay, let's choose this, but please add all your comments and wishes.
I put my email and my WhatsApp on. I think most of you have it, but there's my email and my WhatsApp in the messenger of the group here. If you click on chat, you can see. If Maaike, if you want to put your own, I think most people have it.
Most of your emails, so I can also make a group email.
While you're doing that, I'll just say thank you for organising. I think it was really beneficial to meet all of your faces around the world, and truly global, I must say. So you did a really fantastic job of putting everyone together. Yeah, so thank you.
Yeah, it's really wonderful to hear all your stories.
Was it nice to watch it suddenly went dark here as well?
Yeah, exactly, that's true.
It's dark then sunny here.
Yeah, exactly. And I think with Remco in New Zealand, the lights just come up. It's crazy.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's autumn here, but it's like very super sunny and quite warm. So I had to move because the sun was coming in.
Yeah.
No, it's great. Yeah, thank you so much, Maaike and João, for organizing this. Yeah, no, it's very helpful. I mean, and for me, I mean, just maybe just to say that, I think it's also kind of, João, what you were saying, like, you know, I feel sometimes pretty far away from things. So for me, I mean, I have more of these conversations. So for me, it's quite kind of essential, no? We're talking a lot about essential stuff. But for me, it's quite essential to have these conversations. I mean, they're quite basic in a way, but it's kind of good. But if we, you know, if there's something that I can contribute that is a bit more specific, like it's great. Yeah. So thanks.
Thank you. And also, I think it is a challenge, I think, to have diversity. So if you all can help, I don't know, recommending, and if there is somebody younger, it's nice to have I did a meeting on Monday, and there was somebody who was like 16, and that completely changed the perspective. And then I had another meeting, I think it was a month ago, where there's like one black person and completely changed the perspective. And so if you have people who you want to recommend that's a bit older or younger, or a different race or a different country, or well, this is happening, I don't know, in Mexico or in Nigeria, or if there's people in different parts of the world or different profiles that you think can enrich our or Mara, that's like in the Arab countries, and which is difficult. I would love to hear from people in the Arab countries, and it's difficult for me to know who to invite. And so I know, Philippa, if you know people in the rest of Africa, and like if you can help just like recommending people to join and giving perspective, that enriches the conversation for everyone is something that's easy to do and very helpful.
And but it would be good if you email it to us so that we have a little bit of an overview. And yeah, let's do that. Thank you so much.
Thank you for organizing.
Thank you for organizing.
And maybe if you want to share, I'll set up a group email, and if you want to share text that you're writing or reading, just send it, because it's all it's all very helpful.
Yep.
Okay.
We started on time. We were finishing on time.
Okay.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
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 Bye. Thank you.
Right.